In 2013, a couple was walking across their property in Northern California. They noticed a rusty metal can sticking out of the ground. When they dug it up, inside were gold coins. Then they found a second can, then a third. In the end, 8 metal cans were unearthed, holding 1,427 gold coins from the 19th century, worth roughly $10 million. It is the largest hoard of gold coins ever found in the United States. To this day, no one knows for certain who hid these coins or why. Most researchers believe they went into the ground long before the Great Depression. But this discovery raises another question. If one such hoard could lie unnoticed for more than 100 years, how many more caches like it are still hidden across America? And how many of them appeared in the spring of 1933, when President Franklin Roosevelt ordered Americans to surrender almost all of their gold to the government?
April 5th, 1933, FDR confiscated every gold coin, bullion, and certificate. People had to basically turn in their gold to the federal government. If not, they faced up to 10 years in prison or a $10,000 fine. That's almost $179,000 in today's money.
But something happened that the government clearly hadn't expected. Thousands of Americans decided not to obey the order. They simply hid their gold. Behind Roosevelt's order lay one serious problem. The government could order Americans to surrender their gold, but it had almost no way to check whether they had actually done it. In 1933, there were about 30 million households in the United States. The federal government had neither the manpower nor the authority to search every home. A search required a court warrant, and getting one without specific grounds was impossible. So there was no mass hunt for gold. Instead, the government chose a different strategy. It placed its bets on the banks and on public pressure. The bank became a kind of bottleneck. The government couldn't come to a person's home, but it could control the place the person came to on his own. To open an account, take out a loan, use a safe deposit box. Banks were required to report clients who brought in gold coins or tried to use safe deposit boxes to store gold. For millions of Americans, the bank was exactly where the order turned into reality. At the same time, a powerful information campaign got underway. Newspapers and radio told Americans that holding on to gold meant standing in the way of the country's recovery from the Great Depression. Even the order itself used the word hoarding. Not savings, not property, but hoarding, a word with an unmistakably negative ring. The calculation was simple. People were supposed to bring in their gold voluntarily, and many did just that, but not the majority. This is one of those rare cases where the majority turned out to be smarter. Back in the winter of 1933, the American banking system began to collapse. Banks were closing one after another. People stopped trusting paper money and pulled their deposits en masse, and many of them demanded not banknotes but gold coins or gold certificates, which back then could be freely exchanged for gold. Over a few weeks in February and early March, most Americans who held gold coins pulled enormous quantities of gold out of the banks. To stop the panic, on March 6, 1933, Franklin Roosevelt declared a nationwide bank holiday. Every bank in the country temporarily shut its doors. A few days later, only the banks the government deemed financially sound began to reopen. But by that point, a significant share of the gold had already left the banking system. And only almost a month later, on April 5th, did Roosevelt sign the order for the forced surrender of gold. Which leads to a curious paradox. Anyone who had managed to bring his gold coins home back in February or early March had, in practice, already pulled them out of the bank's reach. And anyone who had left his gold in a bank or a safe deposit box found himself inside the very system through which the government intended to confiscate the precious metal. That is exactly why the confiscation operation, from the very start, turned out to be far less successful than is commonly believed. According to Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz, the authors of the definitive study of U.S. monetary history, Americans voluntarily surrendered only about 20% of privately held gold. The other 4/5 stayed right where it was, in the hands of its owners. But if a significant share of the gold really never reached the government's hands, the next question follows. How exactly did people hide it? The simplest method required no effort at all. If gold coins were already sitting in your home, all you had to do was not go to the bank. The government didn't run mass searches, didn't inspect every home, and had no way of knowing what was tucked in your closet or under the wooden floor of your house. As long as no one reported your gold, it stayed your secret and yours alone. But many preferred to play it safe. A gold coin is almost perfectly suited for long-term storage. It's small, it doesn't rust, it isn't afraid of damp, and it barely changes over time. All you had to do was put the coins in a tin can, wrap them in an oiled cloth, and bury them under a shed or in the garden. Even 40 or 50 years later, you could dig them up in practically the same condition. That's exactly why American treasure hunters still regularly turn up caches like these. Tin cans of gold double eagles, neatly buried in 1933, keep surfacing all across the country. In many cases, the owners of these hoards simply died without ever telling their children about them. But some people didn't break the law at all. The order itself contained a loophole that let each person keep up to $100 in gold coins. Today, that sum seems small, but the limit applied to each person individually, not to the family as a whole. Picture an ordinary family of 5, a father, a mother, and 3 children. That's already $500 in gold, or roughly 24 troy ounces. At today's prices, nearly $100,000, and all of it completely legal. There was another loophole too. The order didn't apply to rare and unusual coins of recognized collector value. The wording was so vague that in the spring of 1933, interest in coin collecting suddenly surged across the country. Coins that yesterday were ordinary savings suddenly became prized specimens from various mint years. Historians of numismatics link this surge directly to Roosevelt's order. Proving otherwise was extremely difficult for the government. Where did an ordinary gold coin end and a collectible one begin? No one was ever able to draw a clear line. Some found an even more creative solution. Since jewelry didn't fall under the order, gold coins began to be turned into jewelry. They were set into pendants, mountings, cufflinks, and even fobs for pocket watches. Technically, these were no longer monetary savings, but items of personal use. The wealthiest chose a different path. They simply took their gold outside the United States to Canada, Cuba, or Switzerland, where American authorities no longer had any jurisdiction. At this point, a logical question arises. If a significant share of Americans really did defy the order, how many people ended up in prison? The answer is surprising. Almost no one. Despite the threat of 10 years behind bars, no mass prosecutions ever took place in the United States. In all that time, the authorities managed to bring only a handful of show trials to court. The most famous was the case of New York attorney Frederick Campbell. About 5,000 ounces of gold were held in his bank account. When Campbell demanded his medal back, the authorities decided to make him the first high-profile example of punishment for the whole country. But the opposite happened. The court refused to uphold the charges, finding legal problems in Roosevelt's order itself. Instead of a showcase victory, the government took a painful defeat and was forced to hastily rewrite the legal groundwork. After the Campbell case, the authorities began to act far more cautiously. And there is a curious paradox in this. The more show trials there were, the more obvious it would become that there were a great many violators, and that the order wasn't working. Every new trial would remind Americans, thousands of people have no intention of handing over their gold. So it was more advantageous for the government to stay quiet. Now for the most interesting part. Picture an ordinary American family in the spring of 1933. They had just 10 gold coins of $20 each, ordinary family savings. At the government's demand, the family turned them in at the bank and received $200 in paper money in return. Less than a year went by. In January 1934, the government raised the official price of gold from $20.67 to $35 an ounce, by nearly 70%.
But we were stuck to a gold standard that limited us from the way that we could print money and create money. So what we did is we confiscated gold only to revalue it and basically raise the money supply, or give us taking away the restrictions from us being able to actually print money the way we wanted to.
Create that fiat currency.
What you get is a strange picture. While some people held $200 in paper, the government was already valuing that same gold at nearly 70% more. Now imagine that this family had defied the order and simply kept its 10 coins. Within just 9 months, they were worth nearly 70% more. Today, those very same 10 coins could have passed down to children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, turning into not just a family heirloom, but an inheritance worth tens of thousands of dollars.
There's a lot of things that when you read about what happened in this time frame rhymes a lot with what's going on right now, so learn from the past.
But this story has one more curious detail. In 1933, the U.S. Mint had managed to strike 445,500 new $20 gold coins featuring Liberty, but they never entered circulation. In the midst of the gold reform, their release was canceled, and nearly the entire run was sent to be melted down. It seemed these coins had vanished forever, but a few specimens did leave the mint illegally. Over the following decades, the authorities tracked them down all over the world, confiscated them, and returned them to the government. Almost every coin that was found was seized. Only one was granted an exception, allowed to remain in private ownership. In June 2021, that coin sold at auction for $18.9 million, the most expensive coin ever sold in history. Its face value is just $20, but time and history made this coin worth nearly 1 million times that. Perhaps the true symbol of this whole story is precisely the coin the government never managed to take. But the story didn't end there. The coins disappeared from circulation in 1933, yet the ban on private ownership of gold stayed in force for another 41 years. In that time, the Great Depression ended. America won World War II. The Cold War began. A man walked on the moon, and Roosevelt's order was still in effect. A natural question comes up. If the confiscation was an emergency measure to fight the crisis, why wasn't it repealed as soon as the Great Depression was over? The answer turned out to be much simpler than you might think. In 1933, gold sat at the foundation of the American monetary system. Every dollar was backed by gold, so the government wanted total control over its reserves. But in 1971, President Richard Nixon severed the link between the dollar and gold. The ban lost its original purpose, and 3 years after that, President Gerald Ford once again allowed Americans to freely buy, hold, and sell gold. Which leads to a curious paradox. As long as gold was essential to the government, owning it was forbidden. But the moment the government abandoned the gold standard, the ban was no longer needed. On top of that, by the time the ban was lifted in 1974, the American currency had lost about 3/4 of its purchasing power. Holders of paper money were losing, while those who had hidden their gold from the government grew richer doing nothing at all. So, where do we stand today? Executive Order 6102 was repealed long ago. Gold is legal, and no one is coming for your coins. But look at what this story really means. The government couldn't reach the metal that was sitting in a person's home, yet it easily gained control over whatever was already inside the financial system. The entire difference between those who lost their savings and those who kept them came down to a single question. Where was your property physically located on the day the rules changed? And now answer yourself honestly. Where are your savings today? For most people, they exist only as an entry. Money sits in a bank account, securities with a broker, retirement savings in a fund. Even gold, many people buy not as a coin, but as an exchange-traded fund. That is, once again trusting a record instead of the asset itself. Today, to restrict access to an asset, it is often enough to change its legal status or an entry in a registry. And this isn't just theory. In recent years, the world has already seen the freezing of bank accounts, of state reserves, and even of physical gold held in storage abroad. History rarely repeats itself literally. It changes its form, its technology, its tools, but its central principle stays remarkably constant. If you found this investigation worthwhile, write in the comments what surprised you the most, and be sure to check out the other investigations on the channel.